one. Welcome to the Mikey Show podcast. I'd like to introduce local producer Matt Keay. Although not a producer of oil, Matt is a documentary film producer. Since 2010, his company Business on Camera has produced over 30 documentary films and TV series. And he's here to actually interview me. How cool is that? Let's roll. Thanks for being here, man.
Thanks for having me. This is exciting. This is a different format for us.
Well, it's fantastic to have you. I appreciate you making the time. We're kind of doing a 2-for-1 here today. I'm being interviewed by you, but on my show, and plus it's part of your documentary. It's kind of a win-win.
Yeah, it's excellent. We bumped into each other at our boys' boxing club.
Kick-ass workout. We went after that and kind of hurt myself a little bit, I think, but it was good. I actually joined the boys for the adult class the day after. It's Legacy Boxing Club. Putting in a plug for them.
Yeah, that's rad. You know, you taught me a few things in that 60 minutes we were chatting that there's 3 things you want to teach your kids: how to fight, how to swim, and there was a third that I couldn't remember after I left.
How to think for themselves, I guess.
That's
probably the biggest one.
That's excellent. You know, that's part of the purpose of the work that we're doing with long and short form video content is put some education out there for youth, especially our Canadian youth that are maybe thinking climate change is a little maybe scarier than it is. And, you know, we're not here to say either way, but the purpose of this project is to kind of explore those two sides.
Well, I'm so glad that you're doing it, because the difficulty with the climate change debate, and they say the debate is closed, and it's anything but. The challenge is that nobody has access to good information. Oh, are you a science denier? What science are you referring to? Because any science you can show me that says, yes, CO, man-made global warming, and we're all going to die. Any science that says that, there's science from people of equal resumes, you know, the chair of this, the author of that, PhD in this and master's in that, just as much of an expert saying it's complete and total bunk. Now, is the truth somewhere in between, or is it one or the other? We don't know. Unless you actually did the experiment yourself, firsthand, you don't know. And if you haven't spoken to somebody personally who's done the experiment firsthand, then you're getting second, third-hand information, and you don't know.
That's always been the approach that we've taken with our documentary films. We did a piece in 2013 called Pipeline Wars that explored the left and the right and human beings' inability to have authentic conversation at the table, because when you're sitting there with vested interests, you're not able to explore what's possible in a conversation. And for example, what kind of country do we want to create here in Canada, and how does energy fit into that future, as opposed to, yes, build pipelines, or no, don't build pipelines? Where's the vision for the future of our country? And then how would developing or not developing, again, I'm not here to say either way, but where are those questions? Why aren't they being asked?
Well, I don't think the right questions are asked. It's always these dichotomy questions that keep getting asked. It's always all or nothing. It's my way or that way. It's right or left. And that's wrong. When they say, well, solar panels can't do it all, who said anything about doing it all? Why don't we all have a solar panel on our roof to augment the system, to reduce the load? Why don't we have cars that are simply more, instead of just getting rid of all gas cars, period, carte blanche, why not just make them all more energy efficient? We have the technology. I personally am aware of 2 different technologies to make our cars radically more fuel efficient. But then you hear all the conspiracy theories of the patents getting bought up and buried by oil companies. Are they true? I don't know. But it makes sense, because if little old me, who's not a scientist or a petrochemical engineer, knows of 2 technologies that 100% can cut fuel consumption in half, if I've found it, and firsthand have found it, not secondhand, thirdhand, some YouTube video, seen it in person with my own 2 eyes. 2 different technologies. Well, where are they? Where are they? You know, the first car was actually an electric car way back when. And then there was the debate in like 1905 or whatever it was between electric and gas. And they thought, well, there's probably something to this fuel industry. You know, we would probably create another industry if we go gas. So let's go that way and then buy some oil wells. And that's the way that they went.
And the development of these natural resources have done a lot of incredible things for our society. If you look at the advancements we've had in healthcare and extending life, I like to be able to eat watermelon or lobster year round. I like to be able to vacation. I'm comfortable with my electronics and my clothing and my skateboard and my snowboard, and my kids have backpacks that are made out of petroleum and they go to school, and it's just so embedded in our society that I couldn't imagine a world without petroleum products. And if you look at the data around the next 20 years, whether we like it or not, we're going to burn more oil than we ever have as a society. That's 100% certainty. We can't shut it off because people won't have heat. So if we're going to burn oil, it just seems to me that we should be asking the question, if we're worried about CO2, and shouldn't we burn Canada's oil?
I think a part of the problem with the conversation is that when people think energy, they're thinking 100% transportation, and that's it. You know, they're thinking Tesla, that's it. And that's unfortunate because that's just a fraction. And I don't know the exact number, but it's a fraction of what we actually use. Do you like your iPhone or your Samsung? It took energy to build that, a tremendous amount of energy. First, to mine it, to mine the materials, the lithium, everything else, the metals, the precious metals that are in it. It took energy to build the factory, the Foxconn factory in China or wherever it came from. That takes tremendous energy. It takes tremendous energy for all those workers to get to and from work every day to make that iPhone or your whatever your smartphone is. You know, and people don't make that link. It's just not tangible to them. But you can't do any of that with a solar panel. Like it just doesn't happen. And it's not just electricity. And then, as you mentioned, all of for petroleum products, it's almost every product that we have is directly made out of it. The list is mind-boggling. And the hypocrisy with all the people that are stomping their feet and pounding their fists and screaming at people like Greta Thunberg or whoever, how dare you, as she's driving or floating around in a boat made of petroleum products that took a significant amount of energy to build it. They're just not connecting those dots and pointing fingers instead of taking steps themselves. Like for instance, why not, if you're going to drive a car, like almost everybody does, why not drive a vehicle that's Japanese made for starters, because it's going to last longer, and drive it for 20 years? Who does that? They don't. Well, I can't do that. I got to get a new car every 4 years. Well, okay. Well, then you're a horrible human being because you're a hypocrite. You know, if you are a climate change alarmist, or, you know, I don't want to use that wording because it's pointing fingers. It's almost like name calling when I say that, and name calling doesn't get us anywhere. So, if you are very, very concerned with climate change and man-made global warming, drive a car for 20 years. I'm doing it because it's economical. I've got a Subaru Outback out in the driveway. I'm going to drive it till it dies, and I will replace it with another Subaru Outback, and I'll drive it probably till I'm dead, because Subaru, Honda, Yamaha, they all last forever. And that's the type of thing that they'll scream at others, but they won't change their own behavior. And that's what I'm getting at. And there's so many simple behaviors that people can change, but they don't. And as long as they don't have a leg to stand on. It's kind of like the anti-hunting group, right? I don't mind the anti-hunting group. I hunt, and I struggle every year with taking a life. I don't like taking a life, but it's really difficult to put meat in your freezer if you don't take a life. And I'm not prepared to be a vegan at this point in my life. So if you are a vegan and you want to scream at me about hunting, well, at least you have a leg to stand on. If you're not, then shut up, because you're a hypocrite. You're just contracting out the killing. You're not taking the personal responsibility of harvesting that life yourself personally. And it's the same thing with the climate change debate. People love to point fingers and scream, but they don't lead by example. They don't actually show you, look, here's how you can reduce your carbon footprint considerably. They don't do it. They just scream at everybody else. And if anybody was actually serious about their cause, they would lead by example. Like Gandhi as an extreme example. That dude would lead by example.
Why do you think it's important for Alberta to have a diversified economy?
I think we do have a fairly diversified economy. I mean, we have wind farms all over the place. What was the town that had the giant solar, I think it was Medicine Hat, had the giant solar farm and still has it, but it's not economically viable. We have a robust film industry in southern Alberta. So many films are filmed down here. We have tech industries here. We do have a pretty diverse economy. But when you take any staple economy, like if you're to shut down agriculture, that's a major part of our economy. And if you're to attack agriculture the way that oil is being attacked, we would have the same or similar result that we're having right now, this horrible man-made, made in Canada recession, this self-inflicted wound that we're suffering from. So we do have a fairly diverse economy, but I agree that we should continue to diversify it. But diversifying it doesn't mean shutting down oil. I mean, keep that going strong. We need it right now. And if we shut down the Canadian oil sands today, 100%, just flip the switch, turn it into a ghost town, and let a few more 100,000 people go out of work and cripple our economy for the next 30 years. Okay. Now what? Like, it doesn't do anything for the globe. It doesn't do anything for the air. It doesn't do anything for the climate, because all we're doing is displacing. We're not stopping oil production. We're displacing oil production. So we're going for the most ethical oil in the world, which people roll their eyes and laugh at because they've been brainwashed that the oil sands are tar sands and that the oil sands are 5 times or more carbon intensive than other forms of oil production, which is completely false. Completely, totally false. It's between 5 and 20%, according to Vivian Krause. So if you shut it down, all you're doing is making oil dirtier and less ethical, because less ethical labor standards, and you're sending that money to the United States and Saudi Arabia. That's all you're doing. You're helping other people's oil economies and helping nothing. Helping absolutely nothing. And for some reason, that simple logic is just not translating to the people that hate the oil sands. And I don't understand it. It's so simple. Shutting it down just displaces the production. It does nothing. The only way to reduce oil production is to reduce oil consumption. It's the only way. Let the market decide. So back to personal responsibility. If these folks would just drive a car for 20 years, because the amount of energy it takes to build a car is more than that car will burn in fuel for the entire lifetime of that car. You drive a car for 20 years, and that will burn less gas than what it took to make that car. But people don't do it. They could, but they don't. Why not ban non-essential emitters like cruise ships? Because nobody wants, well, I might want to go on a cruise one day. They won't make the personal sacrifice. Yet the big cruise ships that are out there, from Leonardo DiCaprio and everybody else's private ones, or the public big cruise lines, they are bigger emitters than all the world's cars combined. Well, that's simple then. Just ban all cruise ships. You don't need them, but they won't. They won't, because they don't want to give up even that luxury or the idea that maybe I could go on a cruise. I don't want to do that. But it's simple. But the truth is, they don't want solutions. They just want taxes, and that's what I believe is the truth.
Is there anything that has surprised you recently in Alberta or in Canada in general?
The coldness towards Alberta. Just how effectively the brainwashing no, again, that's name calling when I use the term brainwashing. how effectively the propaganda has been, the anti-Alberta, anti-oil sand, anti-energy propaganda. It has been so effective. And the discourse, I've published a couple of letters and a couple of videos that went full on, well, I would call it viral, like 45,000 views, that kind of thing. And the responses, the cold, heartless, it serves you right. You should have diversified. We don't need oil anyway. We don't care if you're losing your home. Quit your bitching. What are you whining about? Responses. I couldn't believe it. Just cold and heartless, with no empathy whatsoever for the people that are, the suicide rate is going up. Every percentage point that the unemployment goes up, there's another 16 Albertans a week that kill themselves. It's a direct correlation, and nobody cares. Nobody cares about the mental anguish, about families breaking apart because of the financial stress, about the fact that hope is gone. People are leaving the province and moving to Texas just so they can survive. Nobody cares. And if you've never lost everything, I have. I've lost everything I own twice. Once as a child and then once about 10 years ago. Lost everything. House foreclosed on, bankrupt and everything. And now that's a story that can be told by hundreds of thousands of Albertans. Hundreds of thousands. I'm a realtor. And the foreclosures that are out there are crazy. And even they aren't selling right now. Everybody who is a homeowner has lost a significant amount of money because the market's been deflating and deflating with really no end in sight. It's a slow leak, thank God, but it's a leak all the same, and it's not going to stop. I don't know how, when we're going to hear the thud and hit bottom, but everybody is suffering. That's some people's life savings. Their house. It's actually most people's life savings is their house. That's their house equity is their retirement plan, and now people can't retire. The first house I sold in Okotoks, their plan was sell, and we did sell it at about 410, and they had just enough equity to buy a $50,000 motorhome, which they are living in today at the Riverside place here in Okotoks, and that's their retirement because that's the only way they could afford to retire, and that's how they're living. Well, if they had waited a couple of years, they couldn't retire. They'd be trapped. They'd have nowhere to go. They'd be living with in-laws, or their kids. That's the only thing that they could possibly do, because they would actually have they would owe more on the house than what it was worth, because that house at 410 is now worth about 340. So nothing left, and they'd be wiped out. And that's the case with hundreds of thousands of Albertans right now.
What would you like to see Alberta do in regards to our energy systems?
Well, I do agree that we need to diversify just for different reasons. I like independence. If we can be more independent from oil, I'm all about that. I'm an independence kind of guy. I don't like being dependent on. It's just safer to have other sources of energy. So if we can slowly wean ourselves off of oil as far as for transportation, at least personal transportation, I think that's a good initiative. If somebody can come up with an alternative to natural gas to heat your house, well, I don't know what the hell that would be, but that's the technology that I would support, and I think that's great. But I'm sorry, repeat the question. I just got lost track.
Yeah, I was just curious on what you'd like to see happen in this province.
So continue to diversify for sure, but not by shutting down our oil production. The only way we can afford to diversify, the only way we can afford to do these green initiatives, to subsidize one of these super trains from Edmonton to Calgary, cool stuff like that. The only way we can do that is by keeping the oil flowing. So we're shooting ourselves in the foot by attacking oil. That provides us with the funds that we need to diversify, which we have been doing the whole time. But I think we probably could do a better job of it. So more money in tech, more money in have it so that oil isn't such a big part of our economy, but still going as strong as it possibly can. that is just a win-win situation. And the whole country, and then we won't mind paying our ridiculously huge transfer payments because we'll be in good shape.
We touched a little bit on media and the influence that it can have on the perception, on public perception. Could you describe how things like documentary films and video content can contribute to more informed and educated citizens?
It's a counterbalance. One of the reasons I think shows like the Joe Rogan podcast are so incredibly popular is that you get the real story, you get the full story. And you see people in a different light. Like Joe has had Democratic candidates like Bernie Sanders on there and Tulsi Gabbard. And until you actually hear them having a conversation, a real, genuine conversation, you don't know who they are, what they're about. All you hear is the sound bites on the news. And the news is always going to be biased because whether it is state-sponsored, like RT or CBC, or whether it is for-profit, like everybody else, they're either catering to their advertisers by creating clickbait and creating a sensation, or they're catering to the state that's sponsoring them by kissing their butt. Either way, it's going to have a taint because you have to serve your master. Whether your master is the state or whether your master is private industry, you're going to have to serve your master. So there just isn't any unbiased news out there. Whether you're listening to Fox or whether you're listening to CNN, it's all bullshit. It's just a matter of degree and on what topic. On some topics, CNN will actually be accurate. On other topics, Fox will be more accurate. It depends on the topic and it depends on the agenda. But at the end of the day, it's never going to be pure because they have they got to sell advertising space. They got to get viewership. They have to create outrage, or the algorithms, they just don't get the viewership. So long form conversations in podcast form and documentary form are the only way that we can get a clear assessment of who people are and what the issues are. There is no other way. And I think there is such a appetite right now to have the truth, or at least clean information, honest information. And honest opinions, not spin, not political speak, but straightforward, candid information. There's a huge appetite for it now, and we're seeing that as the regular mainstream media is dying, print media is almost dead, and all these other forms are dying. And this is the rise. What you're doing with documentaries and what I'm doing with my 2 podcasts. That is the new resource where people are going to.
What are your thoughts on climate change, generally speaking?
Well, when Al Gore came out with An Inconvenient Truth, I was predisposed to believing it. And I did. And I was running around waving the Al Gore flag, making all my family members and friends watch An Inconvenient Truth. I bought the DVD, and I thought, holy crap. Even though I remember way back in 1988, I read a book by David Suzuki and Anita Gordon called It's a Matter of Survival. Well, I encourage anybody to pick up that book from 1988 from David Suzuki and Anita Gordon called It's a Matter of Survival. Read it and look at all the predictions in there. And what you're going to find is those predictions are as scary as Greta Thunberg's and all these other climate change predictions, and actually scarier, but not a single one of them came true. Not a one. Zero. And by now, our population was supposed to be at 25 billion. We're at 8, which is still a problem, but it's less than half of what was predicted. There's supposed to be no summer ice by now on either ice cap. The sea level is supposed to be 30 feet higher than what it is right now. All these things just did not happen. Polar bears are doing just fine. They're actually thriving. They're increasing in population. There is no problem with polar bears, and yet people won't talk about that. But the people that actually study that for a living, they're like, polar bears are thriving to the point where they're actually quite a threat for the northern communities. They got to shoot them, but they're not allowed because they're falsely saying that they're endangered, and they're not. They're thriving and hunting people right now. So again, we don't have access to good information. And the people that are terrified about that think that the apocalypse is coming because of man-made climate change, they're not looking at the mainstream predictions that have all been false. They taught, I did a school project in grade 6 about climate change. So I understand, like, I get it, and it makes sense. You thicken the atmosphere, it traps more heat. It does make sense, but CO doesn't do that. It doesn't. Particulates, other pollutants, maybe, it makes sense. But people also don't have the capacity, the mind capacity to really understand how massive our atmosphere is. Like it's mind-boggling how big it is. If you fly from Halifax to London, and really look and try to understand that you're 30,000 feet up, and there's lots of atmosphere above you yet to go, and just the sheer volume of it, it's going to be a while before we make a dent in that and are able to actually affect our atmosphere as far as thickening it and creating man-made global warming. It's just not happening.
Even CBC the other day, 2 or 3 days ago, was saying, oh, you've got climate change to thank for a brown Christmas here in Calgary. And here it snowed. But it's that ongoing manipulation. I'm concerned also for the youth. You've mentioned, sometimes the UN Energy Conference can put certain people on pedestals. And it's borderline terrifying, though, that the way our own citizens in this country are viewing the industries that create what makes this a great place to live is that I'm grateful that we have energy. I like to be able to eat what I want, when I want, get what I want, and that our youth are scared. That's a terrifying thing. That you used Vivian Krause's example of 600 million of foreign funding, but that doesn't even begin to describe the globally. And, if I was the 150 families that earned all the wealth in the late 1800s or early 1800s, I'd want to maintain all that wealth and power too. But it's scary that they can just plop somebody into a country right before their election and then manipulate all of our youth.
If you were a multi-billionaire and you wanted to preserve it and grow it, the first thing that you would do is own and control all sources of information to the public. Back from Gutenberg and the printing press, that was the truth. And as soon as somebody came up with a printing press, is those in power that said, "Ooh, I'm going to get me some of them, and I will control it," because and that's always been the tactic. So, the Catholic Church for a few centuries made it illegal for anybody to learn how to read, except for particular priests of a particular level. The lower level ones weren't even allowed to read, because that's control of information. That way, you come to church, we tell you what to think, and that's your only source. So you go, oh, okay. You can't read, so you can't, all you can do is come up with rumors and that, but you can't pass information along otherwise. So you believe what you're told to believe. And then as time came on, more and more people got the ability to read, and then more questions start getting asked because more information is out there, or more access to information is out there. So soon that model fell because they couldn't control it. But now most people can read, and everybody can click on YouTube, for any kind of bit of information. But it's still controlled. It's controlled through algorithms. It's controlled by funding mostly, because whoever is funding the person who is employing the reporters, they're going to do two things. One, they're going to flat out manipulate through the editors to please whoever their master is, whether it be public or private. And the second is they're going to hire what is called useful idiots. So people that naturally are predisposed to espouse the ideologies that you want them to espouse. And that's the hiring process. It's not your talent or anything else. It's what are your viewpoints? because if I'm going to get you to be a talking head on TV or radio for the viewpoints that we want pushed forward, we want to know that this is going to be an easy go for us, because you're just going to nod your head and lap it up and agree with it. The more you're not too sure about the dialogue, that person could be a problem child. They might start asking questions. Can't do that. Can't ask questions. So they hire people that so that they're preaching to the choir, and everything else is done in edit. What we cover, what we don't cover.
What role do you think conferences, like for example the UN Energy Conference, there's a lot of them, but what role do these international conferences have on policy and public perception?
I think it's waning. I think that the UN at one point, especially when I was a UN peacekeeper, so I wore the blue beret, the whole 9 yards. I was pretty proud of that way back in 1994. And I thought, geez, what a nice benevolent organization we're going here, because we actually did save lives. We're actually keeping peace. We're in the middle of Serbs and Croats and keeping them from killing each other and keeping children and families alive. So I had a pretty good opinion of the UN, and I think the world did in general, when there was a lot of peacekeeping going on in the Balkans in particular. But as that kind of fell by the wayside, I think the importance of the UN is waning. I think people are less and less impressed by them, less and less thinking that it's necessary or important. So I think their influence is starting to drop. It's still influential, but my perception anyway is that it's waning. I don't have any stats to back that up, though.
That's interesting, because I was actually feeling the opposite way, that they had more power and influence than ever, but it's maybe not necessarily the UN that has the power and influence. Just using your example of this young gal who was put up on the pedestal, that and how that has transcribed through social media to manipulate and indoctrinate Canadian youth. That was never possible before, to have someone appear at a conference and then take that essentially brand and marketing campaign that's been really well executed and then siphon that into the hands of so many citizens. And again, I don't know either way. I think it's interesting. I'm curious why you think the energy conversation has become so polarized.
Because it's been engineered that way. To sell news, you need a dichotomy. You need an us versus them. Without the dichotomy, you don't have outrage. And nothing sells as good as outrage. If it bleeds, it leads. So the news knows this. They've always known that. And it's always been the way since Gutenberg came out with the printing press and they started making the first newspapers. Outrage sells. On the YouTube algorithms, Facebook algorithms, all of them, outrage sells better than anything else. And that's why there's a dichotomy, because it's engineered that way. You're wrong. No, you're wrong. You're an idiot. No, you're an idiot. And that's the fight. And you see it in the social media conversations, in the blogs and the chat rooms. And I don't know how much of it is organic, and there's got to be some of it. I wouldn't be surprised where they're actually paid trolls to just go on there and swear at each other. And I think it's been shown that there are troll farms. There's people sitting in their little cubicles paid to be shit disturbers and to call people names. So that's why it's because it's engineered to be divisive. And it's also just like in the Catholic Church, people weren't allowed to read. We're not allowed to have good information. We're not allowed to have a good curator of information. There is no such thing as trusted news anymore. Everybody's got an agenda, and it's profit. That's the agenda.
There's one group I came across from Alberta. They're called Todayville. And they're an independent news site that started in Edmonton, started in Red Deer.
I love
Edmonton.
those guys. They've published me 3 times.
Oh, excellent. We're bringing them down to Calgary here actually in the coming weeks.
Oh, wow.
A strategic joint venture. Could you draw a parallel between Western separatism and our inability to get Alberta's product to Tidewater?
Well, it's just one of many issues. It's not. It's more than just pipelines. But with the pipeline issue, it's because it's a made in Canada problem. This is not a natural, normal recession. All the pain that we're having is because people won't allow us, the rest of the country won't allow us to exploit our own resources. They're ours. And they don't have to do anything for us. They don't have to give anything to us. All they got to do is get out of our damn way. It's all they have to do is just step aside and let us build our damn pipelines, which are ethical, safe, way better than rail. But they won't do it because they've been brainwashed that oil is evil, period. And there's no conversation about it. So that's the frustrating part. From an Albertan perspective, for myself, it is so dysfunctional as a Canadian family that our other family members, our provincial siblings, would rather protect their ideology that oil is evil than help Albertans keep their houses, keep our life savings, not commit suicide. We're being destroyed, and we're being destroyed because the rest of our provincial siblings just won't get out of our way. They don't have to do anything other than step aside, and that is tragic. It's absolutely tragic, and they won't because as Vivian Krause with Over a Barrel did so well. Showed that the propaganda machine to villainize Alberta Energy has been so effective, and it's been going on for a long time, and you're not going to switch people's minds like that. It's just not going to happen. So that's why I'm a Wexiteer. It's one of the reasons is that we've been vilified, and we're not digging ourselves out of that hole anytime soon. There's no ad campaign or anything else that can easily undo or influence what's been happening over the last 20 years and more, really. But, and very concerted effort over the last 10 years to villainize Alberta. Our only way to survive because of that sentiment is to separate. And then it's my position that we'll have a lot more negotiation power as an independent nation to get our products to Tidewater. And I mean, Trudeau's building the TMX pipeline right now. Good. But there's about 20 other pipelines we need to build. And this is just one. So we need a lot more. And I'm quite confident that if the TMX gets finished, which it may not, it could easily get stonewalled at the West Coast. But even if it does get finished, it's going to be the only one. And we're not going to see another pipeline for 20 years, if that. And that's not enough. That's not enough to get our product to Tidewater. We need other solutions. The TMX is, it's an olive branch. That's all it is. It's the lesser of two evils for Trudeau, who absolutely hates oil, even though he benefits from it every day.
When we were at the boxing club, we were talking a little bit about the old proverb or short story of the king or father who had the young son and said, "Would you rather have money or power?" And the son said, "I want money, Dad." And as he got a little bit older, into his mid-teens, he asked him the question again, "Money or power?" "I want money, Dad." And then much later in life, into almost 30, the same question, and the son flipped and realized the power. And it seems as though if you have the power, you just take the money.
My dear friend Tom Manley spoke at 2 Wexit rallies about exactly this. And Alberta has been rumbling about separation for a long time, but that's all it was coffee room chat. It wasn't seething anger like it is today. But the reason it is what it is today is because we had money. We used to have money. We knew that we didn't have power, but we didn't really care because life was good. We had jobs, the economy was good, unemployment was low, and we were free to work hard and play hard. We had that ability. So when Ottawa decided, well, okay, we have the power, you have the money, but now we want both, which they do. So now Alberta has neither power nor money. We have neither. And it's a made in Canada reason. We're doing it to ourselves. It's a self-inflicted wound. And that's why we are more angry than ever, because Ottawa wants it all. They want our money, even though we have no more to give, and refuse to allow us to have a voice. The Senate is wildly imbalanced. I forget the exact numbers, but it's unfreaking believable. There's more senators in Quebec than there is in all of Western Canada combined. And seats in the House, and the riding distribution, it's all against us, all of it. And it's not just because we have less population. It's not. It's the system itself. We are systemically at a power disadvantage, and it's enshrined in the Constitution that we always will be. So we need a severe constitutional reform, just so we can have a fair voice. So that's why Western alienation is what it is now, because we have neither money nor power. So without the power, we can't fix it, and we don't have self-determination. We can't even use the resources that are right here, that are right at our fingertips, and we have to just ignore it. It's like having a giant basket of food and it's locked up by your neighbors, and they're not eating it, but either are you, and you're hungry, and your family's hungry, and all they got to do is get out of the way and let you get into that vault and eat that food, but they won't. And that's what's happening right now. We have the resources at hand, and the rest of Canada is demonizing us and not allowing us to eat, literally to eat. People are scrimping everywhere on their heating bills, on groceries, everything. You know, it's so much more than, now I can't afford a nice vacation this year. You know, that's not what it is. It's now, as it was under Kathleen Wynne's Ontario, you have to choose between food and heat. And that's true. People are making this choice now, and it's self-inflicted. It's happening because of the propaganda against our from our own country against us in Alberta. It's so wrong. It's so incredibly wrong. But people just don't give a shit. They're cold. They're cold about it. They don't care. We're the redheaded stepkid of Canada. And that's not right. And I think that's the biggest driver to the Western separation sentiment.
And when Canada was being formed, it was like, oh, we got all this power in the east, and then we need the coast out on the west. And then what do we do with all this stuff in the middle? And it took some time, for example, for Alberta to even become its own province and to join Canada. Can you talk a little bit about how Saskatchewan, Alberta, and parts of the north were originally going to become, I think Buffalo was
the Republic of Buffalo.
Republic of Buffalo. And can you talk a little bit about, or draw a parallel in how drawing more lines on the map helped keep the power east, where if we were that large province, we would maybe not be in the same situation?
Well, I'd be getting over my skis. I'm not versed with that part of our history, other than we never asked to be part of Confederation. We were told that we were part of Confederation. King George, or whoever it was at the time, just signed us in. I went, oh, okay. But we never had a vote to agree to be part of Confederation like Newfoundland did in 63. I think it was 63. Forgive me if I'm wrong on that. But so it was, there was no consent when we came in. We just didn't fight it when it happened.
And, I like being Canadian. I like defining myself as a Canadian. When I travel, I'm treated nicely. I like the human rights and equality and the values that make us uniquely Canadian. But the more I start to learn about the history of our country, I feel a little bit kind of cheated. Like, hey, let's give these blankets that are covered in disease to the Indigenous people and then hold them hostage to make them sign the treaties, and then we'll give them the medicine. Like, I didn't learn that in school. I learned that this was a really friendly, you got John Cabot and these, this nice kind of situation here with the Indigenous people. And the more I start to learn about what really happened, it's like, oh, maybe what I thought it meant to be Canadian maybe isn't actually the case.
Well, we like to take pride in the fact that we didn't have African slaves. We didn't participate in the slave trade. But yes, we did. They just weren't African. They were Chinese. The Canadian Railway is built with blood and tears. It is a horrible tragedy how our transcontinental railway was built. And I encourage anybody to do the tunnel tours in Moose Jaw, Saskatchewan. It's a fantastic trip. Maybe stay at the spa there, but do it and learn that all these Chinese Canadians, in Moose Jaw in particular, were forced to live underground because the racism was so freaking horrendous that they'd be spit on and scowled at and just treated worse than just totally vilified. And we treated them horribly. And they were trapped, living under the streets with no sunlight for like a decade at a time, trying to get enough money doing the most horrible slave labor in these laundromats that you can believe. Just horrendous conditions. And so many of them became opium addicts and everything else. But we do not have a clean, unblemished history. What we did to our Indigenous people is absolutely horrific, as you alluded to. But what we did to the Chinese, oh my God, it was absolutely horrible. And nobody really talks about it a lot. There's been prime ministers with public apologies and this, that, and the other. But some of the anti-Chinese laws were actually into the 2000s before they went away, like 2006 before the last law was like, ooh, is that really still a law? Sorry about that, and so it's recent history. Just like the last residential school, I think was in 97 or 98. It was unbelievable. So all this virtue signaling, shut up, because you are not virtuous. Or Justin Trudeau, his dad was prime minister for 12, 13 years, something like that. And the residential schools were going strong under his entire reign. Didn't shut it down. Well, then, the apple doesn't fall far from the tree either. We are not the virtuous nation that we like to think. Now, we're a pretty good nation now. I also love Canada. But being a independent Western Canada doesn't make you less Canadian. It just changes a few lines on a map and changes the political system so that we can make up our own mind and have some self-determination so we can be independent. And just like Texas is. That's all it is. We're still, an independent Western Canada is still Canadian. It's just Western Canadian.
The last question that I'd have is you touched on the David Suzuki book from '88, which I will check out. Thanks for that. And there, there's another book that was written called 1984. And, the energy piece is one kind of layer to this. But if you look at the 5G that's being implemented across communities, I think the town of Airdrie will be one of the first communities to have 5G implemented, and the integration from beyond smartphone to the watch to the glasses, and then eventually having, you're always connected to the internet. You've got it embedded in your body, and you can, anytime, where's the best Chinese, you'll just know. Text picture of this beach to your mom, you'll just think it and it'll do it. You'll just always be connected to the internet at all times. And when you talk about the flow of information and what's controlled is when you're always on the internet and you've become, the singularity happens where they talk about man and machine actually merging, which has a lot of benefits. That's incredible. I want to have unlimited access to information.
We already have.
We are cyborgs right now. It's right not now. In our body, but we are cyborgs. So when you talk about the predictions,
the only difference is the input. The connection, instead of being wired, is like Wi-Fi. It's our consciousness. Our consciousness is we are already augmented machines with our phones. It's already happening. So the next step is simply to have this, instead of having to carry it around, having it plugged in. iPhones are going to, or smartphones are going to be obsolete soon enough, as soon as it goes from voice recognition to voice understanding, AI, the singularity. And that's going to change everything. And there'll be no going back short of one hell of a good EMP, which I'm kind of hoping for.
The technology exists now where you can put a sticky pad on your head and think, and the computer will type for you. And so if, to your point around the control and dissemination of information, if it's in your mind and you're one with technology, the powers or the tech companies or whoever it is how is that going to be monitored? Because quite literally the same way I didn't know the real history of our Indigenous people is information can slowly start to be eliminated. Books will be gone. You know, the 1984 is...
It's here and worse than George Orwell imagined. I mean, hell of an imagination, but George Orwell was 100% right. So if you haven't watched the movie 1984 or read the book, because not too many people read books anymore, but for those that do, read the book 1984, look at where we are today, and it's all come true. And as technology expands, it's sold to us as convenience and cool and the next neat thing. But what it is mechanisms of control. Back in the day, the mechanism of control was religion. And I'm a spiritual guy. I believe there's probably a God, you know. I do. I believe that there's some sort of a creator, but what or who or what the agenda is or the will of the creator, I have no idea. And I don't believe that the Bible is the revealed word of God. Might be. Maybe I'm dead wrong. But that's not my personal belief. But where was I going with that? But religion was a mechanism of control, was my point. And it was just a way to scare the shit out of people, invent hell. Why did they invent hell? To scare the hell out of people. That's why. It's a mechanism of control. And the more control can happen, it will happen, because power always expands. And one of the ways to have power is control. If you don't control somebody else, you don't have power over them. So it's controlling the information by aggregating Google, which has happened. Google, Facebook, all of it has been aggregated, YouTube. And so the more you centralize that power, the more powerful that you are, like communism. And that's why people have these rosy ideas of communism. Oh, Cuba's pretty good. Yeah, unless you live there. You know, and they don't understand that it's all mechanisms of control. And they don't understand how that translates to their life directly. And it's like, well, let's look at what a controlled life looks like. You go to the grocery store and you can choose between a loaf of bread and buns, one of each. There's no variety. You can't choose between whole wheat and white and multigrain. No, there's one. Whatever the state thinks you should be eating, that's what you get to choose from. That's it. Soda pop, well, that's probably not good for you. So if you're going to have a soda, well, this is the only soda we're going to allow, and no more than 6 per person per month. That's it. That's your allotment. And with today's technology, it's so easy to keep track of all that. But more than that, you don't need that. You don't need it, so you can't have it. Same as the gun debate. Well, who needs an AR-15? Well, there's no end to what do you need? Do you need a cruise ship? Do you need a Mexican holiday? Do you need those things? Do you need a car with 300 horsepower? No, and no. You don't need any of those things. So, but that's the mentality of communism. Do you need it? Well, then you're greedy. If you have more than you need, you're greedy. But people don't realize that we all have more. We have more clothes than we need. We have more shoes than we need. We have more food than we need. We have more choice, more vacation than we need. Communism takes all of that away. More choices of career. You don't get to choose. Well, I want to be a reporter. No, sorry. We did this psychometric test on you, and it says that you should be working in the mines. Oh, shit. I don't want to work in the mines. Doesn't matter. That's where you're working. Go do your duty for your country. And that's communism. And people are running around wearing Che Guevara shirts and Che flags. I'm like, oh my dear Lord. you don't know what you're giving up. It also means that you can't fly a Shea flag. Like you can't fly anything that isn't approved by the state. And that's where we're going with these new bills that Trudeau's been passing. We are not marching towards, we are running towards this kind of a world. And it's that's part of the shaming that happens, the public shaming if you don't comply with what is racist or what is environmentally friendly or whatever the state tells you that is. If you don't comply, you are attacked. And or in the Google world, you're demonetized on YouTube or you're deplatformed. But we're already here, and as technology increases, the control will increase with it, and our lifestyles will continue to be more and more and more restricted.
Yeah, thanks for the great dialogue and thoughts. This is really going to help support our film project. Like you mentioned, our production company, Business on Camera, and we're producing about 250 minutes of content under a brand that started with Canada 150 called We Maple. So if anyone out there is curious to check out any of the content, Instagram, YouTube, or just Google We Maple, and you'll find the video content.
All right, brother. Well, thanks so much for being here and for doing a duel. You're interviewing me, and at the same time, I'm creating an episode of the Mikey Show podcast. Thank you for tuning in. We are available on YouTube, but really, if you want to get all the content, go to anchor.fm. We're also available on Google Podcasts and all the other good ones like Spotify. Thanks for tuning in.